Takeoff's mother and father are now battling over his estate. Takeoff passed away recently. The late rapper reportedly died without a will. Now his parents are hashing it out legal matters to figure out who will become the rightful heir to his $26 million fortune. So according to Georgia law, without a will, Takeoff's closest relatives will now inherit his wealth and his personal assets. That includes his lucrative music catalog, residual income he generates from record sales, but it appears as though there might be bad blood between the hip-hop star mother and his father. Both are fighting over who will be controlled and distributing and managing the late star's assets. This is Matt Garland, NMLS number 58700, but better known as MG the Mortgage Guy. I am not an estate planning expert, so I had to bring in a superstar attorney, Sabine Franco. We need to analyze what's happening. Now, unfortunately, we've seen this story before.
Right, all the time.
All the time with high-profile individuals, especially in the entertainment industry, that pass away untimely, and they didn't have all their ducks in a row. So what's your thoughts on this whole situation?
It's unfortunate. We're seeing it so much, and I hate to have to talk about it, but at the same time, I think it's important because these are people of influence. It's important to highlight that this is the type of thing that happens. So Takeoff had $26 million. Not everybody's going to have $26 million. However, whatever you do have, it's important to make sure that you give it a destination, right? So putting an estate plan in place actually gives your assets a destination. So in his situation, not only is it going to be messy because his family's fighting, but it's going to be messy because he has so much assets, they're not going to know where to begin, right? So that's what ends up taking so much time. Like it takes years and years because one, they have to value what he has because it's intellectual property, right? So you have copyrights, you have music, you have royalties that are going to be coming year after year, you know? So that has to be valued. How much is this? And then who does it go to, right? So it's messy. It can be a lot easier, especially when we see like young people dying unexpectedly, you know, their families are losing them. And so it makes it so much harder to have to now go through this whole fight, this whole mess, and it ends up tearing up families, as we can see what's happening right now.
So how do we go about preparing ourselves for the unknown and making sure we have the proper plans in place?
Yeah, so you said it right. An estate plan is what needs to be put in place. And what does that mean for most people? Are like, what the heck is an estate plan, right? So an estate plan is really just giving direction to the assets that you have. So your home, your retirement accounts, your income, the assets that you own that are bringing in money over and over, you know, that residual income that we all want, you need to give it a direction. And how you do that is with putting in things in place like a will or a trust, depending on the size of your estate. And when you put these tools in place, it's actually like a vehicle that will be able to transfer to the next generation, right? So in order to have generational wealth, you need a vehicle to pass it on to the next generation and the next generation. And when you're dealing with the size of estate that Takeoff had, you're going to need something more than a will, because a will is going to have your family tied up in court and have this whole discovery process going, and it's going to cost a lot of money. So in his case, he needed a trust. A trust would have allowed him to put directions in place as to where he wants his assets to go, who he wants it to go to, and it could even be distributed over time. It doesn't have to be something that's given like outright, one shot, because we know how that goes, right? People just end up blowing that money. So he can have put in place who he wanted to go to, and he could have decided the timeline that thing would have been distributed to his loved ones.
What do you think stops us from doing a trust?
I think what stops people is that it's not sexy, right? Like, it's not fun. You know, the fun part is probably making the money and getting the money, and nobody wants to think about dying. We think that we're going to live forever. We don't want to think about, the hard part, like what's going to happen to your kids if you pass away. Like, who do you want to benefit from your estate? Is it going to be this loved one or that loved one? Or, we just have to think about the hard things. And I think between it not being interesting, between it being a hard conversation to have with most family members, and then the fact that it takes some steps, like you got to get your stuff together, right? You got to sit down and figure out, what do I own? And let me, put this all down on paper, and let me think about these hard questions on how my assets should go. And people just don't want to deal with that. They want to leave it till tomorrow because they feel like they have time. But as we can see, we don't know what tomorrow brings.
And the best way to protect your assets and have your wishes is to have a trust?
So for some people, right, if you have less than $100,000 and maybe you don't have real estate, or maybe you have just one property, you're not concerned about your family members fighting over your estate, a will might be good enough for you because your family's not going to fight. So therefore, it's not going to take as long and it's not going to be complicated. So the courts don't have to be super involved in figuring out what the value of your estate is and all that good stuff. It's also important to have a will when you have young children, because you have to state in a will who is going to take care of your children if you're not around. So a will is required for that. So even if you have a trust, you're going to have a will as well to make sure that you outline those things. So now, as your estate gets more and more complex, you have multiple properties, you have properties in different states. You want to make sure you have a trust, because if you have just a will and you have properties in different states, now you're going to have a probate action in every single state that you have real estate. And not only is that going to be costly, now you got to have a family member who's willing to do all that legwork to have to, deal with all these different court actions. And then and it's going to be timely, right? It's going to take so much time. So now if you have a trust and your trust owns all this real estate, your one trust, now you don't have to do all of that, right? The person who's going to step in after you, who's your successor, trustee is what it's called, that person just basically is plug and play. You just handed them the keys, all the instructions are there, and they could just run with it.
How often should you update your trust?
So I say if you have, life events, like say, for instance, you get married or you get divorced, or, the people who you have selected within your estate plan is either no longer around or maybe the relationship changes. So you want to do an update then. But if everything is sort of status quo, I say take a look at it every 3 years. Maybe like, for instance, at my firm, if the laws change, we want to make sure we touch base with our clients and say, okay, the laws changed. This might have affected you in this way. Or we want to check in with you because you may not be thinking about, let me call my lawyer because something happened. We want to check in and say, hey, is everything the same as, we sort of spoke about it? And another thing that people don't realize is when these life events change, you want to make sure that you look at things like your beneficiaries, right? You want to make sure that if you got divorced, that you still not leaving everything to the ex, right? Because that happens all the time. Those type of things are very, very important because I've seen it happen. People got divorced and they had kids and they never updated their, beneficiaries, and they pass away. The ex-wife gets it. And if their kid was not from that marriage, then it's like they're disinherited and they don't get anything.
I want people to be able to reach out to you if they want to get their plan set up. So tell them where you practice at and how to find you.
Yeah, so I'm licensed in New York and New Jersey. We're also partnered with other attorneys in other states. So if you either want to work with us or you need a referral, we'll be happy to connect with you and make sure you get your plan done either way.
Yeah, I highly recommend you guys reach out to Sabine and her firm. They definitely can help you. They got my plan straight. I hope you got some value out of this video. All of Sabine's information will be in the description below. Again, this is Matt Garland, NMLS number 58700, but better known as MG the Mortgage Guy. Peace.